So, before I start my story, you need to understand that the period we understand as ancient Greece was incredibly long. It's 2,000 years of history. And at the one end, you've got the birth of the gods, and at the other end, you've got this guy. There was once a writer by the name of Lucian who so fed up with the ridiculous and speculative travel writing that he came across day to day, where people would go on their holidays and have a chat with Zeus or play cricket with centaurs, that he decided he was going to set up a voyage of his own. He hired the best captain, the finest ship, and the 50 stoutest sailors that his money could afford him, and set off for a more plausible voyage. Now we fast forward a little bit, because having narrowly escaped being turned into trees by the half maidens, half vines, who were both lusty and a little bit vicious, the crew find themselves 2 men down and becalmed on the sea. They are set adrift with no clue as to where they are, because where they've been was part wine, part blood, and they are looking for some kind of bearing. When out on the horizon, one of the lookouts spots a really peculiar set of clouds. The clouds twist and turn and begin to suck water from the sea, and the sailors realise that this is getting closer and closer to them. In almost no time at all, the storm is upon their poor little vessel, and it is sucked up the full length of this water spout, and the ship is flung high into the air, where, terrified and hanging on for dear life, there they stay. For a week. They have no idea how far they have travelled. They have no idea quite where they have ended up, until on the morning of the 8th day, one of the other lookouts spots land. We are saved, land. And every grappling hook and anchor that the ship has is flung out to drag them to this land. A curious, rounded, almost shining grey kind of a land. And the sailors step off one by one, Lucian taking notes in his journal. And they walk a little further onto this land, and they realise that it's beautiful. It's crystalline and shining and glistens. And it's inhabited. There are villages, there are towns, there are people. They turn back to look at the ship to cast an idea as to where they are going. And they realise that behind the ship is a beautiful, rounded, blue-green marble covered in swirling clouds. And they realise that behind the ship must be the earth. But if that's the earth, then they must be, just as they're about to make this realisation, they hear the agonising cawing of an enormous guard vulture. 20 foot tall and ridden by an entirely too tough, too armour-plated guard. The vulture begins to breathe down their neck, and the guard climbs down the wings and says, "We've not seen you here before. Are you spies? I'm taking you straight to the king." Lucian and his crew barely have time to recover their senses before they are pecked and clawed and shuffled off to the palace. The palace is in a state of disarray. Golden and shining it might be, but it is on a war footing. Tables are covered in maps and charts. There are those teeny tiny little models of armies that are being pushed across desks. And the king is up to his elbows in paperwork and decision making, when the guard flings Lucian and his crew and says, "We've caught you some spies, your majesty." And King Endymion looks up from the table and goes, "They're not spies. They're Greek." "Well, I'm Turkish," says Lucian. "No, you're Greek. Look at the clothing." "You are a useless guardsman. Just get back there and tidy up your vulture for the morning." "Brothers," says King Endymion, "it has been too long since I have seen people from Earth. Tell me, how have you come here?" And Lucian and his crew recount the story of how they got sucked up and have ended up, yes, King Endymion confirms it, on the moon. Well, since you're here, I'd love to show you some hospitality, says King Endymion, but unfortunately we are on the eve of war and I need every hand I can get. I don't suppose you could possibly lend me some assistance. Lucian is delighted. War correspondent, what more legitimate form of realistic writing could there possibly be? He rolls up his sleeves and is absolutely ready for the task. But what war is this, Your Majesty? He asks. Well, there was some trouble in the colonies, says King Endymion. I was trying to set up new colonies on the Morning Star, and the King of the Sun got there first and had none of it. There was a great clash, all the colonists had to come back to the moon, and we've been at war ever since, and tomorrow morning looks to be the final battle. Tomorrow morning. Well, gentlemen, I'd love it if you could join my ranks, and when we win, which we shall, says King Endymion, then you can all have the best of my hospitality. Oh, and how are you at riding vultures? Lucian and his crew get a fairly good night's sleep, and they are awoken in the morning to all of the preparations of battle. Troops being organised, war donkeys being blowed like trumpets to send out messages to one troop or another. And there, poor Lucian finds himself, scroll and pen in hand, trying to juggle this while standing on the back of a giant vulture. His balance is not good for this, he is struggling. Now, he looks to the left of him and sees the massed ranks of war vultures. To the right of him is a whole platoon of giant pigeons whose feathers are made entirely of daisy leaves and whose wings are giant bits of lettuce. And in front of him are the shock troops, the infantry division with enormous poisonous turnips in their bags ready to be thrown at the enemy. And there he stands, knowing that the last order before battle commences was for the giant spiders of the moon to draw down a curtain across the troops so that they could not be seen from the oncoming troops. Hundreds of spiders fall gently from the sky, weaving their gentle curtain and scuttering off into the distance. And then a war donkey is blown. The moment of battle is a fearsome one, and Lucian has never seen anything like this. Beaks and claws and feathers abound, and off into the distance he can just make out the shapes of King Phaeton of the Sun's troops. The ground beneath him begins to shake, the very surface of the moon starts to thud as 20-foot-high fleas spring up ahead of them and then land back down with a crash. The giant selection of King Endymion's base jumpers wearing parachute dresses stand no chance against this horde of fleas, and turnips are bouncing off them left, right and centre. It looks like the battle is turning against King Endymion. He is sat at the back of his troops, desperately waiting for reinforcements, knowing that none of them are coming. Lucian is struggling to control his vulture as the next wave of infantry fly past him, the Catamesites, with their mushroom hats and their mushroom shields, raising aloft brave spears of asparagus at the enemy. And Lucian loses his balance. He slips from his war vulture and lands hard on the ground. As he wakes, he realizes that it's either a cracking headache or he's just seen brave Sagittarius and a fleet of unicorn centaurs flying through the air to the king's aid. But no, the sound of the air changes. Instead of the screeching and cawing of battle, there is a buzz. A horrific, uniform buzz, as the massed ranks of King Phaeton's air force of enormous gnats comes breathing down on all of Endymion's troops. Hundreds of arrows rain from the sky and pin them to the spot. Even the dog-faced men of Sirius riding their enormous acorns stand no hope against such a tumultuous rain of arrows. And Lucian is captured as prisoner of war. The battle is lost. And as King Endymion's troops march from the field, flee, are captured, King Phaeton decides he is going to get his victory in early and begins to build an enormous wall at the edge of the moon. It is 1,000 foot high and 40 feet thick, and no sunlight passes that wall. The moon begins to cool. In the meantime, poor Lucian, who really didn't sign up for this, is rotting in a jail cell in the corner of the sun. He is surrounded by other captured soldiers, other soldiers of the moon, one of whom dies and turns into a puff of smoke that drifts through the bars. One of whom, who has been struggling in agonies for some time in the corner of the cell, gives birth to a baby boy through his knees, because that's how the men of the moon give birth. The baby pops out through a knee and is vigorously rubbed into life by one of the other men, and sure enough, the mewling cries of newborn life fill up that prison cell. Lucian has never seen anything like it. And it is said, and rumoured amongst the prisoners, that King Phaeton has noticed that these Greeks, I'm Turkish, these Greeks and the Turkish man, are in fact of merit and worth to King Endymion. And he said that they might be valuable. And so when cold and shivering King Endymion finally sends to the sun for some kind of treaty, well, the sun's got a bargaining position now. So it is that Lucian is sent back to the moon with all of the rest of King Endymion's troops and the rest of Lucian's men. And the treaty is as follows: that the moon will no longer make war on any of the stars or planets. That the morning star will be colonized, but half by the people of the moon and half by the people of the sun. And that all of these stars and celestial bodies should come together in some kind of peaceful understanding, a federation, if you will. And so it is that Endymion finally welcomes back Lucian and says, Lucian, it has been so good to have you, and I am so sorry that we could not provide the hospitality I promised. Please stay. You can enjoy yourself here. You could become part of our community. And, you know, my boy's looking for a husband. And Lucian says, well, thanks, but no thanks. I think I really ought to be getting on my way home. But of course, how he got home is a completely different true history.